You know that very specific kind of panic that sets in when you're studying for a big professional certification.
Oh, absolutely. The late nights.
Right. You've got the flashcards, you've memorized the AICP Code of Ethics, and you feel like you have a handle on right and wrong. It feels manageable.
It feels very black and white. Don't take the bribe,
Yeah,
don't lie on the resume, don't moonlight without permission.
precisely. But then you put the flashcards down and you walk into a real planning office, or you turn the page to the essay portion of the exam.
And suddenly right and wrong aren't black and white.
They aren't even gray. They're basically invisible. Because you're dealing with algorithms and private contractors and political pressure that the code just doesn't seem to explicitly cover.
That is the exact moment where the textbook ends and the actual profession begins. And that's exactly where we're going today.
We're doing a deep dive into a piece of source material that you really need to understand if you're taking the exam. It's called Introduction, Planning Ethics in the 21st Century.
By Lisa A. Schweitzer.
Yes. Published in the Journal of the American Planning Association, JPA, back in the spring 2017 issue, volume 83. Number 2.
And we should be clear right off the top, this isn't just, a random opinion piece.
Right.
This was the introduction to a special issue where they actively tried to bridge pretty massive divide in the planning world.
It really was a divide.
Yeah.
Schweitzer writes about this moment around 2013 to 2014 when she was teaching a planning ethics course.
Right.
And she realized the material she had to teach was, well, it was kind of broken.
We're at least significantly disconnected from reality.
Disconnected how? Like, was it just old?
It wasn't just age, it was the focus. There was this massive gap in the literature.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So on one side, you had the academic research, and this was very high-level macro-philosophical stuff, the just city.
Right, normative theory.
Exactly, normative theory about how the world ought to be. Very abstract.
Which is great for a PhD seminar, but maybe less useful when you have a developer online, too, screaming about a permit.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you had the practitioners,
Right.
the American Planning Association.
EPA.
Right. And they had plenty of material, but it was all hyper-specific case studies. Like, what do you do if you own stock in a company applying for a variance?
Very situational.
Highly situational. Useful for those specific moments, but it didn't give planners a framework for the big structural changes happening in the world.
So Schweitzer's goal with this text and the special issue it introduces was to get the philosophers and the practitioners into the same room.
To answer a really basic question,
Does the old code of ethics actually work in the era of big data, privatization, and highly polarized politics?
and the answer is complex. To get there, we need to look at what she calls the enduring tensions versus the new contexts.
Let's start with those enduring tensions. Because one of her key insights is that the core problems of planning haven't actually changed much over the decades.
The scenery changes, but the plot stays the same.
Right. She references Martin Wachs here, who's a legend in the field. He noted back in 1985 that planners are always caught in a four-way tug-of-war.
Imagine you're standing in the middle of a room and you have ropes tied to you, pulling you in 4 different directions.
Okay, paint the picture for us. Who's pulling?
First, there's self-interest. You want a promotion, you want to keep your job, you want to be liked. That's just being human.
Right. We all have to pay rent.
Second, there's agency interest. This is loyalty to your boss, your firm, or the administration you work for.
They sign the checks,
They sign the checks and they have an agenda.
often very specific marching orders.
Exactly. Third is the public good. This is loyalty to the profession's ideals, health, safety, welfare, the big picture stuff.
The reason most people get into planning.
Exactly. And fourth is empowerment, specifically loyalty to community groups or marginalized people who might be actively hurt by the plan.
And Schweitzer's point is that you cannot satisfy all 4 simultaneously.
Never. If you satisfy the boss agency interest, you might hurt the community, which is empowerment.
And if you stand up for the public good, you might lose your job. So there goes self-interest.
That tension is perennial. It does not matter if it's 1950 or 2050. But, and this is the major pivot for our discussion, while the tension is the same, the environment where you make the choice has changed completely.
Which brings us to the new contexts. If you are listening to this for your exam review, these are the 5 specific areas Schweitzer highlights.
The areas where the ice is the thinnest.
Right. We've got technology, private practice, pro bono work, interprofessional relationships, specifically city managers, and finally, the planner's role or identity.
Let's start with the big one, technology.
And we aren't just talking to, should I use GIS?
No, we're talking about the smart city. Schweitzer discusses a paper in this issue by Nader Afslan and herself, focusing heavily on big data.
The shift here is from planners being users of tools to planners being managers of automated data collection and sensors.
Think about smart sensors on streetlights, apps that track potholes, traffic flow algorithms, adjusting signal timing in real time.
It sounds incredibly efficient. We get more data, we make better decisions. What is the ethical conflict here?
The conflict is who owns the black box. Usually, it's not the public agency, it's a private tech firm.
Right.
And Schweitzer argues that this creates a crisis of distributive justice.
Distributive justice, that is a key exam concept. It basically means who actually gets the goods and services, right?
Exactly. Who gets the services? Who gets the environmental quality? Algorithms are not neutral. They are written to optimize for something.
So if a private firm writes the code,
They might optimize for data collection in profitable areas. For example, if you rely on smartphone data to identify where road repairs are needed, you're going to fix roads in neighborhoods where people have the newest phones.
and you will inadvertently ignore the neighborhoods that might need the help the most, simply because they aren't generating as much data.
Exactly. And the planner, sitting at their desk, just sees a heat map of problems on their screen and thinks it represents objective reality.
So if the planner doesn't understand how the data is collected, they basically become complicit in that inequality.
That is exactly the risk. This is why Afsalan and Schweitzer argue that the AICP needs to adopt a new ethical standard.
The open data ethic.
Yes, the open data ethic.
What does that actually look like in practice? Because I imagine most planners aren't coding experts.
It means planners cannot just be passive users of tech. They have to actively manage data collection standards. You can't just blindly sign an agreement with a tech vendor.
You have to demand that the data standards are open, that algorithms are transparent, and that the public agency owns the measuring stick.
Because if the vendor owns the data, they can hoard it. Schweitzer warns about anti-competitive behavior here.
Meaning the city gets locked into a proprietary system.
Right? They can't switch vendors, independent researchers can't verify the results, and the public loses access to its own information.
So the key takeaway for the listener is that simply buying the tech isn't a neutral act. Planners have an ethical obligation to ensure public access and equity in these systems.
Which segues perfectly into the second new context, ethics in the private sector.
This is a huge shift. Decades ago, planning was almost entirely a government job. Now, a massive chunk of the profession is in private consulting.
Schweitzer brings up work by Lowe and Arroyo here, who looked at special ethical considerations for planners in private practice.
Because the AICP code covers everyone, public, private, nonprofit. But private planners face very unique pressures.
Specifically, the need to attract and retain clients. They have to make payroll.
Right. And I found the results of their interviews really fascinating, specifically regarding how private planners see themselves versus how they see their competitors.
It's a classic psychological phenomenon. They interviewed private planners and found that they were extremely confident in their own personal ethics.
They said, I put the public first, I never cut corners.
I balance my clients' needs with the public good perfectly.
But when they were asked about other private firms,
Totally different story. They were highly suspicious of their competitors. Those guys. They're sharks. They'll do anything for a contract.
the text calls this social desirability bias, which is definitely a term to remember.
Yes. It's a research term, meaning people hesitate to admit their own flaws in surveys. We all like to paint ourselves in the best possible light.
But that suspicion of competitors points to a real structural dilemma. Private planners have to win contracts to survive.
And that survival pressure creates a desperate need for what the text calls virtuous competition.
Virtuous competition. Let's unpack that term because it might sound like a bit of an oxymoron to some people.
It's a concept from business ethics. It refers to fair competition that yields both profits and pro-social benefits, competing by doing social good rather than by cutting ethical corners.
But the text suggests the field has a problem here.
A major problem. The planning field hasn't clearly defined what constitutes good service design, especially when a private firm is paid by the government to serve the public.
Right. If I'm a private planner hired by a city to run a community engagement process, who is my client? Is it the city manager who signs my invoice and wants the project approved quickly?
Or is it the residents who will live with the plan and might want to slow it all down? The code says your loyalty is to the public interest, but your bank account says client satisfaction.
And if we don't have clear industry standards for what virtuous competition actually looks like, The market just rewards the firm that promises the most to the client, not the firm that protects the public best.
The ethical planner might lose the bid to the firm that promises to fast-track everything.
Speaking of bids and market rewards, let's talk about doing work for free, pro bono work.
This is the third context based on a planning note by Lenofsky.
Now, if we compare this to law or architecture, pro bono is seen as noble. It's expected. Why does planning have such a weak tradition of pro bono work?
Mostly because traditionally most planners were already public servants. They were already working for the public good on a salary.
So why do private firms offer free work now?
Lenofsky points out a couple of motivations. One is creative expression or experimentation. A firm might just want to try out a cool new design.
But the other motivation is business development, getting a foot in the door.
Exactly. And that is where the ethical trap lies.
Because in the government sector, we have very strict procurement procedures. Requests for proposals, bidding, transparency rules.
Designed to keep agencies honest and prevent nepotism or favoritism.
So what happens if a firm comes to a city agency and says, hey, we'll do a master plan for this corridor or a design installation totally free of charge, pro bono?
It sounds generous, but it can easily become a loss leader. If that firm designs the free concept, they gain intricate inside knowledge of the project.
And they build relationships with the agency staff.
Right. So 6 months later, when the city puts out a paid competitive RFP to actually build out that plan, who has the massive advantage?
The firm that did the free work, they might have even helped shape the parameters of the RFP without anyone realizing it.
Precisely. So the ethical question the profession needs to address is, when does a free master plan circumvent standard procurement procedures?
It's a gray area. The old code says serve the public, but it doesn't offer clear parameters on how pro bono work might undermine competitive bidding.
Let's move to the fourth area, which is highly relevant for anyone working in local government: the relationship between planners and city managers.
This section looks at a comparison by Johnson, Peck, and Preston, and they put the AICP Code of Ethics right next to the code for city managers.
And on the surface, they share a lot of common ground. Both professions value competency, fairness, confidentiality.
But there is a critical divergence, and if you were taking the exam, you need to know this. It's all about accountability.
Who is the boss?
Right. For a city manager, who are they primarily accountable to?
The code is explicit. They are accountable primarily to elected officials. Their job is to implement the will of the council or the mayor.
Which makes sense. It's democratic administration. The voters elect the council, the manager executes their vision.
But for the planner,
the AICP code is totally different.
The code emphasizes accountability to the community.
And the quote is the long-range public interest.
Yes, which effectively places the planner above or outside the immediate desires of the elected officials.
And that implies a structural guarantee of conflict.
Absolutely. Imagine a city council wants to approve a sprawling retail development because it brings in quick tax revenue to help them get reelected.
The city manager looks at their code and says, my job is to help the council achieve their goals. Let's build it.
But the planner looks at their code and says, this is bad for long-term equity. It's bad for the environment. It violates the long-range public interest. I have to oppose it.
So the manager thinks the planner is being insubordinate, and the planner thinks the manager is being unethical.
And they are both technically right according to their own professional codes. This structural difference guarantees conflict over what actually constitutes a good city.
It really explains a lot of the friction in local government, which leads us to the fifth and final context, the planner's identity.
This section discusses a survey analysis by Loria and Long. They compared survey data of planners from 1979 to data from 2015.
Now, 1979 was a pretty different era in planning. You had a lot of advocacy planning theory.
Planners often saw themselves as political actors, or at least a hybrid. But by 2015, there was a massive shift in the stats.
Far more practitioners identified their role as strictly technical.
I'm just a technician. I run the traffic models. I review the zoning checklist.
Why the shift away from the political identity? The text offers two potential reasons, right?
Yes. First is education. There might be a lack of exposure to advocacy planning theory in modern education compared to the 70s.
And the second reason is pure survival.
Right. The text points out that in increasingly conservative political environments, framing your work as purely technical feels safer.
If you walk into a hostile public meeting and talk about social justice or redistribution, you're a target.
But if you talk about stormwater mitigation and level of service metrics, you're just doing the math. It's a survival strategy.
But there is good news here. Even with that shift to a technical label, What did the survey show about their actual values?
The core ethical commitments remained incredibly consistent across the decades. Planners still strongly value justice and service.
They just might be framing it differently to get the job done.
Schweitzer calls this the abiding decency of the profession. Despite the changes in tools and environments, planners display a consistent desire to do good.
But she has a pretty strong warning about that in her summary and synthesis, doesn't she?
She does, and this is vital. She distinguishes between meaning well and doing well.
Having a desire to do good isn't enough anymore.
Exactly. Meaning well is a prerequisite, but it absolutely does not guarantee you're actually doing well.
Because if you mean well, but you don't understand how a private algorithm distributes resources unfairly, you're doing harm.
Right. Navigating these specific new complexities, big data, privatization, structural accountability, that is what is required to actually do well in the 21st century.
This has been a fantastic breakdown. For the listener, let's quickly recap the 5 key areas we discussed for your mental checklist.
Okay, here we go. Number 1, technology. Remember the open data ethic and the risk of anti-competitive behavior.
Number 2, private practice. Watch out for social desirability bias and remember the need for virtuous competition.
Number 3, pro bono work. Unclear parameters can circumvent standard procurement procedures.
Number 4, planners versus city managers. Know the difference in accountability. Managers to elected officials, planners to the community, and long-range public interest.
And number 5, the planner's identity. The shift to a technical role as a survival strategy while maintaining core commitments to justice.
That is a perfect summary. Now, before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on what we've discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
It goes back to that social desirability bias in private practice, the fact that private planners were suspicious of their competitors but completely confident in themselves.
Right. Everyone thinks they're the good guy.
Exactly. But if every single planner believes that they are the ethical one and that everyone else is cutting corners, does the profession actually have a mechanism to police itself?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Are we just relying on this idea of virtuous competition that doesn't actually exist in the wild? Because if the code relies on a shared professional honor system, but we secretly think our peers have no honor, the whole self-regulation model might be fundamentally broken.
That is something to seriously mull over. It really challenges whether the AICP can enforce ethics without external oversight.
Something to take into your study session. Understanding the theory is one thing, but wrestling with the reality is what makes you a true professional. Good luck with your exam prep and keep digging into these texts.
Best of luck on the test.